The morning mist clung to the grapevines of Sterling Valley Vineyard as I walked the rows my uncle had tended for 40 years. Most people saw a failing winery, 300 acres of supposedly mediocre grapes in California's least fashionable wine region. But I knew what lay beneath the surface, literally and figuratively. My name is Emma Sterling, and my Uncle Marcus just left me what my family thinks is worthless land. They're about to learn a very expensive lesson about judging wine by its label. Really, Emma, you could at least pretend to be disappointed. My cousin Blake called from the gravel path, his Italian loafers entirely unsuited for vineyard walks. We all know Uncle Marcus lost his touch years ago. This place hasn't produced a decent vintage in a decade. I turned to face him, noting how he kept checking his watch, probably late for a meeting about selling one of the luxury properties he'd inherited. The vine seemed healthy enough to me. Healthy. He laughed. The last wine critic who visited rated our Cabernet as suitable for cooking, perhaps. Face it, whatever magic Marcus once had died with your father. That was a deliberate jab. My father, Marcus's younger brother and former vintner, had died in a car accident 12 years ago. The family narrative was that the vineyard had gone downhill after that, with Marcus becoming increasingly reclusive and eccentric. What they didn't know was that Marcus and I had maintained a secret correspondence throughout those years, while my cousins Blake and Victoria were busy climbing corporate ladders in San Francisco. While my Aunt Regina was redecorating her third vacation home, I was learning everything my uncle knew about wine. And Marcus Sterling knew more about wine than anyone suspected. Speaking of cooking, Blake continued, Aunt Regina's hosting a dinner party tonight to celebrate our inheritances. She expects you to come, even if you only got this. He gestured dismissively at the vineyard. I nodded, already knowing what would happen at that dinner. Regina loved an audience for her cruelty, and tonight she'd have a full house. All the successful members of the Sterling family gathered to gloat over their new wealth. Perfect. What none of them knew was that exactly 1 year ago, Uncle Marcus had invited me to the vineyard for a private visit. While the family assumed he was becoming senile, puttering around his failing winery, he was actually executing a plan decades in the making. Come with me, Emma, he'd said that day, leading me to a hidden entrance behind the old barrel room. It's time you saw what your father and I really created here. The steel door was concealed behind rows of dusty barrels, its electronic locks sophisticated despite the cellar's aged appearance. Marcus typed in a code, then pressed his palm to a biometric scanner. After you, my dear. I stepped into what seemed like another world. A vast underground cellar, temperature and humidity perfectly controlled, stretched into the darkness. But it wasn't the size that took my breath away, it was the contents. Rows upon rows of bottles, some dating back to the 1960s, filled the specialized racks. These weren't the mediocre wines Sterling Valley had become known for. These were the results of Marcus and my father's true work. Exceptional vintages, produced in small quantities and hidden away from the world. Your father and I discovered something special about this land, Marcus explained, running his hand along a rack of bottles. The soil here, the particular combination of minerals and the unique microclimate, it can produce wines that rival any in the world. But we knew the family would try to commercialize it, turn it into just another mass-market label. He pulled out a bottle, its label unmarked except for a date and a simple code. So we created 2 vineyards, the public one above, producing decent but unremarkable wines, and the true vineyard, whose fruits are aging here in perfect conditions. How many bottles? I whispered, overwhelmed by the implications. 12,643, he replied precisely. Each one unique, each one documented in these. He gestured to a wall of leather-bound books, detailed records of every vintage, every barrel, every bottle. The family thinks I've been wasting time and money here, Marcus continued. Let them think that. Sometimes, Emma, the best way to protect something precious is to let people believe it's worthless. That day, he taught me everything. The secret irrigation system that delivered precisely calibrated mineral supplements to specific rows of vines, the hidden processing facility built underground, the network of collectors and experts who knew the truth about Sterling Valley's potential but kept the secret. Why tell me now? I asked. Marcus smiled savely. Because I'm dying, my dear. Pancreatic cancer. I've arranged everything. The will, the timing, the proof of what we've created here. The family will get their mansions and bank accounts, But you'll get something far more valuable. You just have to be patient and let events unfold as I've planned. Now, watching Blake check his expensive watch again, I thought about the other calls I made this morning. To James Chen, the most influential wine critic in California. To Sarah Rothschild, whose family had been quietly collecting our secret vintages for decades. To the director of Christie's wine auctions. All would be at Regina's dinner party tonight. All had been part of Marcus's network of confidence. And all were ready to play their roles in revealing Sterling Valley's true identity to the world. "Don't be late tonight," Blake called as he headed to his Mercedes. Aunt Regina hates tardiness almost as much as she hates failure. I smiled, thinking of the unmarked bottle I'd selected from the secret cellar. "Don't worry, cousin. I wouldn't miss this dinner for the world." Walking back through the vines, I remembered Uncle Marcus's last words to me. "The family thinks they're getting the valuable part of my estate. Let them enjoy that illusion for a few more months." The true value of Sterling Valley isn't in its land or its buildings. It's in what we've hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Tonight would be that moment, and I had front row seats to what promised to be the most interesting dinner party in Sterling family history. Regina Sterling's mansion glowed like a cruise ship in the twilight, every window blazing with what she called appropriate celebratory lighting. I parked my modest Subaru between Blake's Mercedes and Victoria's Tesla, carefully removing the unmarked wine bottle from its temperature-controlled carrier. Right on cue, James Chen's Bentley pulled up behind me. The world's most influential wine critic stepped out, adjusting his signature red Bowdy. "Everything in place?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Just like Marcus planned." Sarah Rothschild? Already inside with the Christie's representative. Regina nearly fainted when they arrived. Apparently she didn't expect her little inheritance party to attract such prestigious guests. The mansion's foyer buzzed with expensive perfume and forced laughter. Regina held court near the grand staircase, wearing what looked like half of her inherited jewelry collection. Victoria and Blake flanked her, champagne flutes in hand, all three of them pointedly ignoring the household staff they'd inherited along with the property. "Emma, darling." Regina's voice could have etched glass. "How brave of you to come. I hope the drive from that dreadful vineyard wasn't too dusty." "Not at all, Aunt Regina. I brought wine." She flinched slightly. "Oh well, I'm sure we can find some use for it in the kitchen." Actually, James Chen stepped forward. "I'd be very interested in tasting whatever Miss Sterling has brought." After all, Sterling Valley did produce some of the most remarkable wines of the 1990s. Regina's carefully maintained smile flickered. She hadn't expected the evening's prestigious guests to acknowledge me, let alone show interest in the vineyard's wine. "Ancient history," Blake cut in smoothly. "The place hasn't produced anything worth drinking in years. We have some excellent French vintages for dinner." "I'm more interested in California wines these days." Sarah Rothschild joined the conversation, her Austrian accent making everything sound like a royal decree. "Particularly certain private collections I've been fortunate enough to acquire." Dinner was served in Regina's formal dining room, all crystal and sterling silver beneath a chandelier that probably cost more than most people's homes. I waited until the first course was cleared before making my move. "Since we're celebrating inheritances," I said, standing to pour my unmarked bottle, "I thought we might taste what Uncle Marcus left me." "Really, Emma?" Victoria sighed. "No one wants to drink that vinegar." But James Chen was already lifting his glass, examining the wine's color in the chandelier light. "Interesting. The clarity is exceptional. The color suggests significant age, yet remarkable preservation." He swirled the wine, took a professional sniff, and froze. The entire table watched as he took his first taste. "My God," he whispered. This can't be." Sarah Rothschild was already reaching for her glass, her eyes wide with recognition. "Is this what I think it is?" "Sterling Valley Private Reserve, 1992, I confirmed. The year my father and Uncle Marcus perfected their special growing process." Regina's face darkened. "What nonsense are you talking about? Marcus never made any private reserve." Actually, the Christie's representative spoke up. "We have extensive documentation about Sterling Valley's private collection. Wines that never went to market, produced in small quantities using revolutionary techniques. We've been tracking their auction values for years." Blake laughed, but it sounded forced. "Auction values for Emma's cooking wine." The last authenticated bottle of Sterling Valley Private Reserve that came to market, Sarah Rothschild said quietly, sold for $42,000. The silence that followed was absolute. Impossible. Regina finally sputtered. Marcus was broke. The vineyard was failing. The public vineyard was producing exactly what he wanted it to produce. I corrected her. Decent, unremarkable wines that kept everyone from looking too closely at what was really happening at Sterling Valley. I opened my laptop, connecting to the dining room's hidden projector, another of Marcus's careful preparations. The screen descended silently behind Regina's head as I pulled up the first images. This is the real Sterling Valley legacy, a state-of-the-art underground facility, temperature-controlled cellars holding over 12,000 bottles of private reserve wines, detailed records of every vintage, every experiment, every breakthrough in Marcus and my father's revolutionary growing process. Photos scrolled across the screen, the hidden cellar, the sophisticated equipment, the rows of valuable bottles. Then came the documentation, auction records, collector testimonials, scientific analysis of the soil and growing conditions that made Sterling Valley unique. The last part of Uncle Marcus's records, I continued, is a complete catalog of every private reserve bottle, including their current market values. The total collection is worth approximately $486 million. Victoria's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the imported marble floor. Additionally, the Christie's representative added, "We've already received offers from several major wineries interested in the proprietary growing processes developed by Marcus Sterling. The patents alone could be worth billions." But we got the valuable part of the estate," Blake stammered. "The properties, the investments. Worth about $160 million combined," I nodded. "A nice consolation prize." Regina stood up so quickly her chair toppled backwards. "This is fraud. We'll contest the will." "I wouldn't advise that," Sarah Rothschild said calmly. "My family has been privately investing in Sterling Valley's real production for decades. We have extensive documentation of Marcus's methods, his experiments, and most importantly, his mental competency when making these arrangements. Face it, Aunt Regina," I said softly, "you all got exactly what you valued. The showy, surface-level wealth. Uncle Marcus left me what really mattered, his life's work, his true legacy." The evening dissolved into chaos after that. Regina had to be helped to her room after what her doctor called an acute stress episode. Blake and Victoria huddled with their lawyers, desperately seeking ways to challenge the will. But Marcus had been thorough. Every document was in order, every detail legally sound. Within a week, the wine world was buzzing with the revelation of Sterling Valley's secret production. Our first public auction saw a single bottle of 1992 Private Reserve sell for $67,000. The waiting list for future vintages grew so long we had to hire staff just to manage it. I kept the vineyard's original buildings exactly as they were, a reminder that true value isn't always visible on the surface. The public tasting room still offers good but unremarkable wines, while the real production continues in the hidden facility below. 6 months later, Regina tried to make peace. She arrived at the vineyard in a cloud of expensive perfume, talking about family unity and shared opportunities. I let her wait in the public tasting room for an hour before sending out a message that I was too busy with a soil chemistry experiment to meet. Blake and Victoria eventually left the country, unable to face their social circle after the truth about their inheritance became public. Last I heard, they were trying to start their own vineyard in Argentina. Good luck to them. Growing truly great wine requires more than money and ambition. The original bottle from the dinner party sits in my office, empty now but still valuable as a reminder. Next to it stands a photo of Uncle Marcus and my father, taken the year they discovered the unique properties of our soil. They're both laughing, covered in dirt, holding glasses of what would become their first private reserve vintage. Last week, a young sommelier visited the vineyard. After tasting our public wine, she looked puzzled. "There's something more here," she said. "Something hiding just beneath the surface." I smiled, thinking of Uncle Marcus's words about letting people believe something is worthless until the right moment comes to reveal its true value. "You're right," I told her. "There's always something more. The trick is being patient enough to let it age properly." Sterling Valley continues to produce 2 lines of wine, the public vintages that keep expectations low, and the private reserve that reminds the world not to judge wine, or anything else, by its label. Every bottle that emerges from our hidden cellar carries a small inscription that Marcus added to the labels years ago. Veritas sub superficie. Truth lies beneath the surface. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving that they never knew what was right in the first place. As for me, I still walk the vineyard every morning, checking the vines that appear so ordinary to passing eyes. Below my feet, in climate-controlled perfection, another private reserve vintage ages toward revelation. And somewhere, I like to think Uncle Marcus is raising a glass, toasting the moment when everyone finally learned what he always knew. That true value, like the finest wine, often requires patience, wisdom, and the courage to look deeper than the surface.